Hey guys, this is LaMonster here at LaMonster Garage, and it is Spider Fest week. We have a lot of people coming in, getting work done, and we are honored to have a factory rep from Elka Suspension. And he's been installing shocks today, and uh, I'm going to have John kind of tell us a little bit why the shocks are very important part of the vehicle, how they work, how they operate. This is getting changed out on a 2018 RT, and maybe he can also debunk some of the rumors out there, false information and all that about suspension. But anyway, this is John, and he came down from, where are you from, John?
Montreal, Canada.
Montreal, okay.
Great White North.
Great White North. So he got to experience some of our weather last night.
Yeah. Nice tornado warning. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah. So John, tell us why customers should consider this shock on their Spyders.
For sure. So that is the big question. And we get all the time is from consumers saying, why do I need to change out the shocks? Why is it so important? Well, the reasoning is it has everything to do with the control and the handling of the vehicle. Without good suspension, then you're compromising on that. And that's not something you really want to compromise on. So I'll explain quickly here as to where the fault is, or where the problems are with the stock suspension. So here we have stock shock, typical 2018, 14, 18, and now 19 RT is all the same shock. So it's a non-adjustable. You can't adjust a preload, you can't adjust the rebound. There's nothing much that you can do to get this to work better for your needs. As we all know, Spyder riders can vary from anywhere to 150 to sometimes twice that. And so you can't expect the same shock to be able to do the same job for each type of customer. So the main problem with this shock is right here. The first part is the coil. Coil spring is rather thin. It's not a very, very thick spring, so its capacity to hold weight is not fantastic. What will allow a shock to use its travel, so this is what we consider travel, is how much of this chrome shaft is showing. So the spring will determine how much travel is being used. So the biggest problem that we see, that we experience, is as you're going into a corner with an RT, especially the new ones with the bigger engines, they're heavier machines. What happens that as this shock compresses, you're coming into a corner, you're taking a right-hand corner, the vehicle will lean to the left. So this shock is now compressed as it's coming into that corner. What happens that shock has probably used up the vast majority of its travel, just in terms of weight transfer. And now that spring has built in a lot of tension and it wants to re-extend. A spring has memory. So if you take a spring, you compress it, you let it go, it wants to come back to its original state. So that's what this spring wants to do when it's in full compression. So the role of the shock absorber itself here is supposed to dampen the spring's memory when it wants to re-extend, but it doesn't do a good enough job. So what happens when you're coming around a corner, and I'm sure all these RT riders out there have felt this, you're coming in a little bit hot, maybe in a corner, you go to take that corner, shock compresses, re-extends, and you get this wallowing sensation. Almost feels like the front end of the bike is swimming. And that's being caused by the spring extending too quick and the shock not absorbing its travel or that rebound fast enough. So what we've done is we've developed the shock for the RT with a stronger spring with less preload. So we're still allowing the shock to use its travel and absorb bumps. But most importantly is that the shock is built in with an adjustable rebound dampening, as well as adjustable preload. So we can cater the amount of load based on the customer weight and the type of usage or the type of roads, and adjust that rebound so we make sure that when you're coming into that corner and that front end rolls, that it doesn't cause that bouncing and oscillation. So what you're getting is a really nice smooth ride on rails. Totally different ride. It's not just a question of comfort and control, but it's a big safety issue. If you're not feeling safe on the machine, you're hesitating coming into a corner, and God knows what can happen after that. This allows you to ride safe, comfortable, and for a lot longer time because you're not as tired always fighting into the corners. So that's what we provide with our shocks.
Now, on you have several different shocks, and this is a stage 2, correct? So, can you explain the difference of the different stages and why someone might consider one above the other?
Sure. So for most applications, we will offer a stage 1 all the way up to stage 5. Our Elka suspension has been around for a long time, and our aftermarket products in the off-road market is where we primarily came from. So that allowed us to develop a lot of different product and adjust, from non-adjustable product to adjustable. To be very honest with you folks out there, when you're riding a Spyder, going up to a stage 5 or a stage 4 may just be overkill. You don't need something that complicated. All you need to do is get a stage 2. It's cost effective, it works perfect for what you need, and anything more is, to be quite honest, not necessary. So stage 2 is where you want to look into for both front and rear options. It's the best bet.
Yeah, and I personally have had stage 2 all the way up to stage 5, and I tend to be a more aggressive rider, and the 5 is a great shock because of just so much more adjustment. But like you say, the average rider, it's overkill, and even for me it was overkill.
Yeah.
Right now I have stage 2s on my F3, and I love them. I don't see a reason to change anything or go to a 5. And we're trying here at the Monster Garage. We're not just salesmen, we're actual riders, and we're going to tell you what's best for you, not what's best for our pocketbook.
Exactly.
So this is a great value. You can tell just the quality of the shock. Here's basically a stamped out shock.
So it's using rubber bushings. These things wear out pretty quick. The size of the shaft, it's a 14 millimeter shaft, rather fragile, pretty weak spring, not a lot of dampening inside the shock. Compared to ours, using a stronger spring, 16 millimeter shaft. It's an all aluminum body, so lighter weight. We have a floating piston inside which separates nitrogen gas that we use inside the shock from the oil. So just so many different components in terms of quality that makes this a great product.
Yeah. Now, how long have you been building shocks for the Can Am Spyder?
Since the birth, 2008. So
2008.
We've been doing shocks, and it's not just a question of manufacturing. We have so many years of R&D and time. I've come year after year after year to these events, and there's no better real-world testing than to be out here with Spyder riders, listening to their concerns, listening to their needs and their wants, and making adjustments as a manufacturer to make sure our product is always at its best. So just the amount of years that we've put into to getting these right is super valuable. So there's no other shock company out there who has the amount of years and experience that is required to come out with a quality product for this market.
Correct, and that's a one thing that I always tell people. For whatever reason, every manufacturer skimps on the suspension. Basically, they know that either a guy that's a performance oriented guy, he's gonna change the exhaust, he's gonna change the suspension. These shocks are basically throwaway shocks. Once you start losing the dampening and the memory in the spring, you just throw them away. There's no good way to rebuild them. I've seen different products out there for giving a preload to them. They're kind of...
Well, these shocks cannot be rebuilt. These are
Right.
welded. they're welded sealed up here, they're sealed welded here. So once this shock is done, which is, it doesn't take very long for a shock like this to be done. It's a completely sealed unit. It's what we call an emulsion shock, which means that the gas and oil are mixed, and it creates what we call emulsion, which wears out the shock really, really fast. So these shocks don't last long and are not of very high quality. So if you always want a good quality ride on your Spyder, then getting rid of these is the best thing that you can do.
Yeah. And to that regards, these shocks are rebuildable.
Yeah, fully rebuildable.
The Monster Garage is going to be setting up as a authorized service center. So if these have been around out there over 10 years now. So depending on, how much you ride, how hard you ride, how heavy you are, at some point these are going to need rebuilding. And we're going to have the capability to do that here at the shop, and we're looking forward to that opportunity.
Sure.
But once again, this is something that we have on our bikes, and that's important. Anything you buy at the Monster Garage is something that we would use on our own personal rides. We're not embarrassed by them. This is a great product. I was fortunate enough to be one of the very few first testers of this. A guy named Doc Doru. He's the first one that I know that had Elka suspensions, and it's come a long way, and it's been an awesome upgrade.
So I'm going to start getting these installed. Pretty simple. So I've already preset the preload based on the rider's weight. Set the rebound also on the rebound adjuster. So I'll install this and I'll show you what we're talking about on the next shock before installing it. So just install that back to the same holes. There's no cutting, modification, welding, anything at all like that necessary when changing out your shock. So it's a pretty basic install.
So John, we noticed that some of the springs on these shocks face down and some face up. What's the reason for that?
Well, the original shocks that we had started developing for the RTs did not have what is now called, or what we're now using, a floating piston, which separates the nitrogen gas in the shock from the oil. So in the first generation, we weren't doing that. So it was important for us to install the shock the way I'm installing it right now, which is spring down, which is contrary to the way the stock shock is installed. But since we've started developing or building shocks, which are now called floating piston, we refer to as IFP, internal floating piston, you can install this shock this way with spring down or the other way. I just like installing it this way simply because the rebound adjuster is here at the bottom. I always make sure that it's facing the opposite way. So it's right here right now. So it makes it easy for me or for the customer to access it if he wants to make adjustments. If the rebound adjuster is up here, it makes it a little bit tougher to get to. So I want to simplify it, make it easy for the consumer if they want to make any adjustments later on.
So when you order a shock from us, there's a form that you fill out, and it's basically we want to know where these shocks need to be as a base. Now, the nice thing about the Elka suspension is it's a starting point. It's not necessarily a final destination, but you can adjust a preload by adjusting the spring collar, and you can adjust the dampening. And the more familiar you get with the ride and with the shock, you may want to start playing around with that. It's not necessary to just start turning knobs and turning collars when you get it. It should be set up very close to perfect, just based on their experience
And we've been able to accomplish that simply, again, the amount of events that we've gone to has allowed us to do enormous amounts of what we call R&D, research and development, with the consumers directly as to what is the best setup. So now we know a very, very good baseline. So we know how much preload to put for a specific weight rider. We know how much rebound to put based on, you know, road conditions, or the, again, rider weight may have an influence on the rebound and how much rebound we'll put. So these are all things that we've learned throughout the years with R&D in the field. So again, any other suspension company out there that doesn't have that much time put into it, you know, can't beat us on that. We're
Now, as far as travel, you're basically limited to travel based on, you know, this the bodywork bottoming out and
correct. Yes.
and all that. Is that correct?
Travel is determined by a couple of different things. Physical limitations will determine the amount of travel. The motion ratio. So when we're talking about motion ratio, we're talking about how much the wheel will move up and down. So that's what we're talking about with motion ratio. So,
Okay.
so a shock's travel is determined by those factors. If a shock manufacturer wants to develop a shock that they claim will have more travel, then you're having problems with physically bottoming out. We could be talking about the nose bottoming out and hitting the road, because if the shock has too much travel and is moving up too much because it has all this available travel, then something is going to give. Something has to hit physically. So that's why we have not developed a shock that has more travel than the stock shock can produce, because there's a reason Can Am originally put a shock with a specific amount of travel,
Right.
because they physically can't go get more travel. So that's what we've done. We've looked at all the options. We maximize the travel that we can achieve without there being any physical issues.
Good.
So before I install the next shock, so what we do, or what I do, before installing it here, is I always verify to make sure that the springs are consistent in terms of the amount of preload. So I just simply take a tape measure to see how long the spring is installed, because now we have the main spring here is 10 inches long if it's not on the shock. So right now I've got about 9 5/8. So I have about 3/8 of pressure on the spring as it is now. So I've set that based on the customer's weight. And I've also set the rebound also based on the customer's weight. So we've sent it here out of the factory. All of our shocks will come with this little label, and it'll tell us how much that rebound was set. So in this particular shock, it was set at -20. So I've taken the shock, I've verified, yes, it was already set at -20, but I've added an extra couple of clicks of rebound based on the consumer and his needs.
So show us how that's done, John.
Sure.
How do you know where you're starting and
Perfect.
where
So
you're finishing up?
So when we're looking at the card and it says -20, so that's rebound screw right here.
Okay.
So basically I will turn it counterclockwise to the 0 position, and if we turn it, we can hear those clicks.
Okay.
So I'm going to bring it all the way to 0. So now I'm at the 0 position. So I want to bring that in 22 clicks.
So is it like 180 degrees is a click? Or how many, or is it a full turn?
It's about 1/8 of a turn.
Eighth of a turn. Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
1/8 of it, every click is about 1/8 of a
Gotcha.
turn. So I've done 22 clicks.
Okay.
And that's where I want it for its sweet point for this consumer here.
Okay.
So we'll go ahead and install the shock on this side. So again, same thing. I'll make sure that the rebound is facing the back, just so that it keeps it clean. If I'm installing it towards the front and you're riding with a group and you may be riding in some roads that have a bit of salt or gravel or whatever debris, it just prevents it from getting getting smudged up or damaged. So I'll always install that facing the rear.
Okay. Now that nitrogen valve, which way, how should that be pointed?
So the nitrogen valve, I always just like to install it down.
Pointing down, okay.
Correct. But there's more than enough room to install that up if need be.
Okay. This morning we did a full set of shocks on a 2014,
Yep.
front and rear, and the rear was actually not too bad. Didn't have to pull the tire or anything like that. Just pull the right side panel, which
Correct. Yep. The right side panel we had to pull out to access the top bolt
yeah.
on that rear shock. Let's go to the side and get the right tools to lock that up.
So as you can see, these front shocks are installed without removing any body panel. So that's kind of nice. If you're wondering if you have to tear into the Tupperware to do this, you'll be all right.
Yeah, so what I do is when I'm taking off the stock shocks, I'll raise the front end of the vehicle using a motorcycle jack, just like the one there. Bring up the front end just so that the wheels are barely touching the ground. And I'll undo the bottom bolts first. Once the bottom bolts are undone, I can then raise the vehicle a little bit more. So it drops the A-arms in the front here and gives me a little bit more access up at the top bolt.
Okay.
So that's what I'll do. So that top one's in. So now I just want to align these a little bit. And you can either just raise the tire by hand if you have the strength to do it. And just kind of try and line that up. So this is the tricky way to do it.
Let me give you a hand there. Up a little bit, whoop, down a little bit.
There we go. Or what you can do, so we'll do it on the other side here. For those of you who might find that a little bit too difficult to do, I'll just try and line that up here a little bit. And you can just bring down the front end slightly, just slowly. So now the tire's touching the ground. Bring that up. See, that's almost lined up. Bring it down just a little bit more.
A little bit too much. There you are.
So like this should be pretty good. How's that look? Maybe a little bit lower. There we go. That might look like. So then, line that up and put that right through. Now we'll tighten these two up. And the very last thing I'm going to check, before I've done all that, when I check the preload, check the spring length, what I did is I loosened the preload collar. You take a look here. So I didn't tighten back the preload collar. There's a lock nut right here that allows me to make sure the preload collar is loose. So I left it loose before I did the install. Once I do the install, I always make sure that this lock nut is accessible for the consumer.
Good idea.
So now I'll just place it here. Around here is perfect. Easily accessible to the consumer. So that way in the future, if the consumer wants to make any adjustments, he can. Because if you lock that before installing it, and that lock nut is way in the back here, good luck trying to get to it and getting that Allen key in there to tighten it up or to loosen it to bring it back to the front. So I always leave it loose before doing any installs.
The other thing is you don't want to try and adjust your preload or the collar without loosening that nut.
Correct.
It's just too much binding on the threads. And then you also don't want to loosen it too much either, because it can physically, if there's a load on it, it can physically jump a thread. So
Correct. So you'll just want to loosen it a little bit. So now I've rotated the lock nut. Make sure the lock nut here is here in front. I'll tighten that up. So that way the customer, same thing again, can easily get to it if they need to make more adjustments. So lock that up. So the rebound has been checked, has been verified on both shocks. I've set that to what I thought was the sweet spot for this particular consumer. Tighten this up. So there we go. So I've already tightened up the top bolts. So we'll just tighten up the bottom ones here.
So just a little promo here, because we this is a rare opportunity that we can get John down here to actually work on the shocks. We are doing free installs during this week. John has volunteered his services, and we got a good stock. Well, we got a good stock of Elkas here. We have more in the warehouse. So if you want to not have to pay us for installation, it'd be a good idea to stop on by and get this done while he's got time to do it. And I think you'll be happy. Every customer that I know that's ever put an Elka suspension on, they love them. So.
And it gives me an opportunity also, being from the factory, to talk to you a little bit about the product and why I'm setting it up for your specific needs. I think that's important. Those are all questions that the consumer has, and I'm here to answer those.
Yeah.
So there we go.
That's it. All right, John. Well, we appreciate that, and good job as always. And we love your stuff. We love being a dealer. We're looking forward to being a service center. And
Absolutely.
So on to the next one.
Those of you seeing that out there, come by La Monster Garage. Come get them installed. Come speak to me. Come speak to Lamont. We'll get you all squared away with whatever you need you have. Suspension needs, any other aftermarket parts. This is the place to be.
All right. Thanks, bud.